You really expect us to believe you just found it? One of the residents said, eyes sliding over the maintenance worker's faded uniform. People don't return wallets like that unless they're hoping for something. They scoffed when the maintenance worker returned a luxury wallet he found on the marble steps. They didn't even thank him, just checked for missing cards and warned him not to linger near the residence. And he only nodded, calm as stone, like he'd been dismissed by people far more dangerous than them. Because he knew something they didn't, within 24 hours, the woman who sneered would hold the keys to his home. This is a story about how one quiet act of honesty can flip an entire power structure. Before I show you the exact moment when the deed was slid across a table in front of witnesses, and the same people who mocked him went silent, let me take you back to the day that wallet hit the ground. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. What none of them saw was the fracture already running beneath polished stone and polished smiles. They thought this was about a wallet. It wasn't. It was about foundations, of buildings, of pride, of the fragile line between power and decency. Caleb Mercer stood there with his hands loosely folded behind his back, the posture of someone trained not to react when baited. He had grease beneath his nails and exhaustion beneath his eyes, but his voice, when he finally spoke, didn't waver. "I didn't take anything," he said quietly. "You can count it again." The lobby smelled of lemon polish and expensive perfume. Crystal light fixtures scattered reflections across the marble floor where he'd spotted the wallet minutes earlier, thick leather stamped with a gold insignia. He could have ignored it, could have left it for security. Instead, he'd picked it up and walked it straight to the concierge desk. Now the woman who owned it, Aria Vale, flipped through its contents with cool efficiency. Platinum cards. Driver's license. Cash folded with deliberate precision, nothing missing. Her expression didn't soften. "You understand," she said, not quite looking at him, "that this community values discretion." Discretion. The word lingered like a stain. He gave a single nod. "Yes, ma'am." Behind her, Victor Halden adjusted his cufflinks and leaned toward a small cluster of well-dressed guests. "We have protocols for this," he murmured loudly enough for Caleb to hear. Maintenance staff should alert security, not insert themselves. Insert themselves. The words struck, but Caleb didn't flinch. He'd heard worse in boardrooms years ago, though none of these people would guess that from the man holding a toolbox by his side. A security guard finally cleared his throat. "Everything seems intact, Miss Vale." Aria slipped the wallet into her handbag. "Fine, thank you," she said, though the gratitude felt procedural, not personal. Then she turned away. Conversation resumed around her like he'd never been there. Laughter swelled. A champagne cork popped somewhere near the elevators. The world of tailored suits and investment portfolios moved on, and the maintenance worker became invisible again. He adjusted his grip on the toolbox and stepped back toward the service corridor. The air shifted immediately, cool marble replaced by concrete walls, the faint hum of ventilation units replacing piano music. It was a place meant for labor, not leadership. As he walked, his eyes tracked the thin hairline crack near the base of a support column. It hadn't been there last month. Not like that. Not angled. His jaw tightened. Above him, heels clicked, and investors chatted about square footage and projected returns. Beneath them, something subtle was moving. He crouched, pressing calloused fingers lightly against the concrete seam. There it was again, the almost imperceptible vibration, a tremor most people would mistake for passing traffic. But traffic didn't run this close. Footsteps echoed behind him. Victor's voice drifted down the corridor. "Make sure you log that and don't overstep, Mercer. Stick to light fixtures and filters." Caleb rose slowly. "It's more than a fixture issue." Victor's smile was thin. "Your maintenance, The words were simple. Final. For a split second, something old stirred inside him. The instinct to argue with data, to dismantle assumptions with calculations and charts. He swallowed it. Not here, not yet. Instead, he nodded once. Understood. As Victor disappeared back toward the glittering lobby, Caleb glanced upward through layers of steel and concrete, imagining the weight resting on imperfect ground. He thought of Lila at home, her inhaler resting on the nightstand beside her bed. Thought of overdue notices stacked neatly in a kitchen drawer. Thought of how quickly stability could crack if the base wasn't solid. The building hummed faintly again beneath his boots, and this time he didn't imagine it. Caleb stayed crouched for a few seconds longer after Victor's footsteps faded, palm flat against the concrete seam. The vibration was subtle, like a truck passing far away but steady. Rhythmic. Wrong. Above him, laughter rolled across the marble. Down here, the air tasted like dust and metal. He stood slowly and jotted a note in the small, worn notebook he kept tucked inside his tool belt. The pencil he used was shaved down to half its size, the edges smoothed from years of use. Numbers came easily to him. Angles, load paths, stress points. He closed the notebook before anyone could wander back and see what he'd written. By the time his shift ended, the sun had dropped behind the skyline, turning the gated community's glass balconies into sheets of orange fire. He rode his bicycle through the side exit, reserved for staff, passing luxury SUVs lined up like trophies along the curb. The ride home took 12 minutes. His house sat just beyond the perimeter wall, close enough to hear construction equipment in the early mornings, far enough that the address didn't carry prestige. The paint along the porch railing peeled in thin strips. The mailbox leaned slightly to the left. Inside, the air smelled faintly of menthol. "Dad?" Leela's voice floated from the couch. "I'm here," he answered, stepping out of his boots by the door. She was curled beneath a faded blanket, a paperback book open on her lap. The nebulizer machine rested beside her, silent for now. He crossed the room in 3 strides and brushed her hair back gently. "How's your breathing?" "Okay," she said. A little tight earlier. His jaw tightened just enough that only someone watching closely would notice. "Construction dust again?" She gave a small shrug. "Probably." Probably. He moved to the kitchen and poured her a glass of water, eyes drifting to the stack of envelopes tucked neatly near the fridge. Red lettering. Final notice. He'd arranged them in a straight line as if order could make them less threatening. The house payment was 3 months behind. He hadn't told her that part. Instead, he returned to the couch and sat beside her. "You finish your math?" "Yeah." It was easy. A smile tugged at his mouth. Of course it was. For a few quiet minutes, the only sound was the ticking clock on the wall and the faint rumble of distant machinery from the development site. He felt it even here, a low pulse through the floorboards. Most people wouldn't notice. He did. After she drifted off to sleep, he rose carefully and moved to the kitchen table. The notebook came out again. He sketched quickly foundation lines, soil displacement angles, estimated load stress based on the new luxury wing's footprint. His handwriting shifted unconsciously, becoming sharper. Technical. Precise. He stopped when headlights swept across the front window. A black sedan idled at the curb. He froze. The engine cut off. A car door opened. Caleb stepped onto the porch just as Aria Vale emerged from the driver's seat, her silhouette framed by streetlight. She wasn't dressed for a gala now, no champagne flute, no audience. Just tailored slacks and a quiet expression he couldn't quite read. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "I didn't expect you to live this close," she said finally. He folded his arms loosely. "It's convenient." Her gaze flicked toward the neighboring houses, then back to him. "May I?" He hesitated, just a second, then stepped aside. Inside, she took in the narrow hallway, the worn couch, the child's shoes near the door. Her eyes paused on the nebulizer machine. "You returned something valuable today," she said quietly. "It wasn't mine." A faint nod. "No, it wasn't." Silence stretched between them, thick with everything unspoken in the lobby earlier. He waited. "I purchased this property this afternoon," she said. The words didn't land at first. They hovered in the air like dust particles in sunlight. "You what?" His voice stayed level, but something cold slid through his spine. "It was scheduled for foreclosure auction next week," she continued. "I acquired it through my firm." His pulse hammered once, hard. "You're evicting us?" "No," she said quickly. "That's not why I'm here." He studied her face, searching for calculation. "For strategy. For leverage." "I didn't buy it to remove you," she said. "I bought it because of what you did." A sharp breath left him. "Returning a wallet doesn't justify—" "It wasn't the wallet," she interrupted softly. "It was how you stood there while they questioned you, and you didn't bend, he didn't respond." She reached into her bag and withdrew a folder. "You'll stay, the mortgage is cleared." For now, he repeated. Her jaw tightened slightly. "There are structural concerns at the development. I've been reviewing reports. Something isn't aligning." The distant rumble sounded again, faint but present. He met her eyes. "You felt it too," she said. He didn't nod. But he didn't deny it either. Before I go further into what happened next, subscribe with the bell on, because what unfolded inside that development changed more than one foundation. Outside, somewhere beneath steel and soil, the earth shifted again, and this time they both heard it. The low vibration rolled beneath the floorboards like distant thunder, subtle but unmistakable. Arya's eyes shifted toward the window as if she could see through walls and soil to the source of it. "That's not traffic," she said quietly. "No," he replied. The word sat between them. She straightened slightly, composure slipping back into place like a tailored jacket. "My engineering team hasn't reported anything critical." "Then they're not looking in the right place." It wasn't defiance. It was a fact. Her gaze narrowed, not offended but calculating. "Victor insists settlement readings are within acceptable variance." Caleb walked to the kitchen table and opened his notebook without asking permission. He turned it toward her. Clean angles. Load arrows. Stress distribution marks drawn in fast, confident strokes. "The new wing extends over a mixed soil base," he said. "Clay pockets. Saturation risk. If compaction wasn't reinforced properly—" He let the sentence hang. Arya studied the sketches longer than she had studied his face in the lobby. "You're speaking like someone who's done this before." "I have." Silence again, not awkward. Heavy. Outside, a truck downshifted near the site. The ground answered with a faint tremor. Her jaw tightened. "Why are you working maintenance?" He closed the notebook. "Life shifts." She absorbed that without pushing. "I need certainty," she said finally. "Not intuition. It's not intuition. Then prove it." There it was. Not dismissal, a challenge. He met her eyes. Access to the Foundation inspection reports. Soil surveys. Structural reinforcement plans. That information is restricted, so is collapse. A breath caught in her throat, barely visible. For a second, the woman who commanded boardrooms looked less certain than she had beneath crystal chandeliers. She thought of investors flying in for the open house this weekend, of contracts worth millions, of reputations that could fracture faster than concrete. "If you're wrong," she said slowly, "you're jeopardizing a development launch. If I'm right," he answered, "you're jeopardizing lives." The weight of it shifted something in her expression. Upstairs, floorboards creaked softly as Leela turned in her sleep. The sound grounded him instantly. Everything circled back to that room. Arya followed his glance toward the staircase. "Your daughter?" "Yes, she has asthma, it wasn't a question." He nodded once. Construction dust hasn't helped. A flicker of realization crossed her face. This wasn't just about architecture, it was about proximity, impact, the invisible cost of expansion. "I didn't know the foreclosure was this close to the perimeter," she said quietly. "You didn't look." The words weren't sharp, they were tired. Her shoulders lowered slightly. "No, I didn't." Another tremor hummed through the house, longer this time. A glass in the cabinet gave a faint rattle. Arya turned toward the sound. "That vibration shouldn't carry this far," she murmured. "It shouldn't," he agreed. Her phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced down at the screen. Victor's name flashed across it. She didn't answer. Instead, she looked back at him. "The open house is in 48 hours. I know. I can't cancel it without evidence. Then don't cancel it," he said. Her brow furrowed slightly. "What are you suggesting?" "Let it proceed." The word surprised even her. "And?" She pressed. "And make sure I'm there," she studied him carefully. "As maintenance, as insurance." A faint, almost reluctant smile touched the corner of her mouth. "You're confident." "No," he said. "I'm cautious." Her phone buzzed again. She silenced it this time. "If I grant you limited access," she said, "you'll keep this quiet. I'm not interested in headlines. What are you interested in?" He didn't hesitate. Keeping the ground stable, another silence. But this one felt different, collaborative, dangerous in its possibility. Finally, she extended her hand, not in the dismissive, transactional way from the lobby, but deliberately. "I'll authorize temporary access to archived reports in the basement control room," she said. "You'll have 1 hour tomorrow morning before staff arrives." He shook her hand. Firm. Steady. "Thank you," he said. Her grip tightened just slightly. "Don't thank me yet." Headlights swept across the window again as another vehicle passed toward the site. The night air carried the faint metallic scent of machinery cooling down. Arya stepped toward the door. "Victor can't know until I know," she said quietly. "He won't hear it from me." She paused at the threshold. "If you're right," he held her gaze, "then this isn't just a construction issue," she finished. "No," he said softly. "It's a foundation issue." She nodded once and stepped outside. The door closed with a muted click. Caleb stood still for several seconds, listening to the sedan's engine start and fade into the distance. His pulse was steady, but beneath it ran something sharper. Anticipation. He turned back to the kitchen table, opened the notebook again, and began recalculating based on expanded access. Load thresholds. Event crowd weight. Worst-case scenario projections. Above him, Leela coughed lightly in her sleep. He paused, listening until the sound faded. Then he wrote one final figure in the margin. 48 hours. The building wasn't the only thing under pressure. By dawn, Caleb was already inside the gated complex, the sky still bruised purple over the skyline. Arya's temporary clearance code had worked. The service elevator granted him quiet passage to the basement control level before most of the staff arrived. The air underground felt colder than usual. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead as he unlocked the archive cabinet Arya had authorized. Stacks of inspection reports sat in neat chronological order, each stamped and signed. On the surface, everything looked compliant. Reinforcement logged, soil tests passed, settlement within range. He pulled the soil survey first. Mixed substrata. Clay pockets confirmed. His jaw tightened. He flipped to the reinforcement addendum. The original plan called for deeper pilings along the north wing, exactly where the luxury expansion now stood. The approved revision reduced depth by nearly 18%. 18%. He didn't need a calculator for what that meant. A faint tremor shivered through the exposed pipes overhead, dust loosening from a seam near the ductwork. He glanced up instinctively. The vibration amplitude felt stronger this morning. He photographed the relevant pages with his phone, then cross-referenced the settlement readings from the last 30 days. The numbers told a story the signatures didn't. Gradual increase, minor deviations, enough to ignore until they weren't. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. He closed the cabinet just as Victor rounded the corner. "Well," Victor said smoothly, adjusting his tie. "Didn't expect to see you down here so early." "Routine checks," Caleb replied. Victor's gaze drifted to the cabinet. "Archives aren't part of routine. They are if you know what you're looking for." A tight smile. "Careful." That almost sounded like authority. The tremor returned, brief but sharper this time. Even Victor paused. "What was that?" He muttered. "Ground shift," Caleb said evenly. Victor scoffed. "You've been saying that for weeks." "Because it's been happening for weeks." Victor stepped closer, lowering his voice. "The open house is tomorrow. Investors are flying in tonight. Whatever theory you're building, keep it to yourself. It's not a theory. It's speculation from a maintenance tech." There it was again. The label. The ceiling placed over his credibility. Caleb didn't rise to it. If the north wing takes concentrated load from event traffic, stress distribution won't compensate. Victor blinked once. "You're out of your depth." "I'm not." Victor's expression hardened. "Stay in your lane." The words echoed long after Victor walked away. Caleb remained still until the footsteps disappeared. Then he reopened the cabinet and slid one more report from the file, vibration sensor data from the subfloor network. Most staff didn't even know the sensors were there, installed years ago for seismic insurance compliance. He scrolled through the readings on the adjacent monitor. Spike. Minor spike. Higher spike. All within acceptable parameters if you weren't watching the pattern. He was. He took one final photograph and closed everything carefully. When he stepped back into the service elevator, he felt the tremor again, faint but insistent, as if the structure itself were clearing its throat. Upstairs, preparations for the open house were already underway. Catering staff wheeled in silver trays. Event planners adjusted floral arrangements under crystal chandeliers. A string quartet tuned their instruments near the atrium. Polished shoes crossed freshly waxed marble. Caleb moved through the edge of it all, invisible again in his uniform. He paused near a support column beneath the north wing balcony. His fingers brushed the surface lightly. There, another hairline fracture, longer now. Arya appeared from the executive office hallway, speaking quietly into her phone. She stopped when she saw him. "Update," she said once she ended the call. He handed her his phone without ceremony. Reinforcement depth was reduced from the original design. Her eyes scanned the image. That was approved. Approved doesn't mean sufficient. She looked up at the balcony above them where event staff were arranging glass tables. How much weight? Too much. Her throat tightened subtly. Victor signed off on the revision. He prioritized timeline, and you're prioritizing stability. Music swelled briefly as the quartet began a rehearsal piece. The contrast between elegance and risk felt almost surreal. She stepped closer to the column, lowering her voice. "If I halt tomorrow's event without proof of imminent danger, I lose investor confidence." "If you don't," he replied, "you risk losing more than that." A catering cart rolled past them, wheels rattling faintly. The vibration carried through the floor again, barely perceptible but present. Arya felt it this time without prompting. Her composure flickered. "How certain are you?" she asked. He didn't hesitate. certain enough to stand in the room when it happens. A silence stretched between them, filled only by the echo of violin strings and distant hammering from the construction zone outside. Victor emerged again, clipboard in hand. "Miss Vale, media confirmations are locked in. We're expecting over 100 attendees." Arya's gaze stayed on the fracture line for a long moment before lifting. "Proceed," she said evenly. Victor smiled. "Excellent." As he walked away, she turned back to Caleb. "You'll be stationed near the north wing tomorrow, I will, and if nothing happens." He held her eyes calmly. "Then I'll go back to changing filters." Another tremor rolled beneath them, slightly stronger than before. She felt it. So did he. The music above swelled into something bright and triumphant. But underneath it, the foundation whispered a warning. Caleb didn't move from the column even after Arya stepped away to rejoin the event planners. The violin's bright notes climbed toward the ceiling, disguising the low, uneasy tremor that pulsed beneath polished marble. He felt it through the soles of his boots. Then his phone vibrated in his pocket. "Leela." He answered immediately. "Hey, sweetheart." Her breathing sounded thin on the other end. Not panicking, not yet, but strained. "Dad, it's Dusty again," she said between shallow pulls of air. "It smells weird." His spine went rigid. "Use the inhaler," he said, already walking toward the service corridor. "I'm on my way." He ended the call and turned sharply, nearly colliding with Victor near the catering station. "Problem?" Victor asked, irritation flickering across his face. "My daughter's having a reaction." Victor sighed. "We're in final prep." "Don't disappear now." Caleb's eyes sharpened. Not angry, just certain. Family comes first. Without waiting for permission, he moved quickly through the back hallway, the echo of his footsteps swallowed by ductwork hum. The tremor pulsed again as he reached the employee exit. Outside, construction equipment idled across the street from his neighborhood. A fine haze hung in the air like invisible ash. He rode faster than usual. By the time he reached the house, Leela was sitting upright on the couch, inhaler pressed to her mouth. The nebulizer machine sat ready beside her. "I'm okay," she insisted softly. He knelt in front of her, steadying his voice. "I know you are." But he could feel it, dust settling into places it didn't belong. The rumble from the development site carried faintly through the walls again, stronger than yesterday. He stood and walked to the front window. A hairline crack ran along the upper corner of the drywall near the ceiling. It hadn't been there last week. His chest tightened. He stepped outside and crouched near the front step, pressing his palm flat against the concrete slab. There. The vibration pattern wasn't random. It was cumulative. He returned inside, grabbed his notebook, and flipped through the latest readings he'd sketched from memory. Then he overlaid them with a rough calculation of external ground displacement affecting adjacent structures. The numbers lined up too cleanly. This wasn't just a North Wing issue anymore. It was spreading. His phone buzzed again. "Arya." He answered. "I just felt another shift," she said without preamble. Her voice lacked the polished distance it once carried. Stronger. "It's transferring load," he replied. "To surrounding properties?" "Yes," silence stretched on her end. "My team says settlement margins are still within tolerance. They're looking at averages," he said. "Not directional stress," he heard her exhale sharply. "The open house is tomorrow afternoon. If foot traffic concentrates on that balcony, it amplifies it." "Yes." Another pause. "My insurance advisor is flying in tonight," she said. "If I raise concerns prematurely—" "You're not raising concerns," he cut in quietly. "You're preventing harm." He looked back at Leela, who was watching him with wide eyes. Her safety. The house. the ground itself. All connected. Arya spoke again, lower now. What do you need? Sensor access, he said immediately. Real-time vibration feed during the event, that's internal, so is collapse. The echo of his earlier words seemed to land differently this time. All right, she said. I'll authorize temporary monitoring privileges, but if you're wrong, I'll accept it. A faint tremor rattled a dish in his kitchen cabinet. Even through the phone line, he sensed she heard something similar where she stood. This is escalating, she murmured. Yes. He ended the call and sat beside Leela again. You're going back? She asked. I have to. She reached for his hand. Be careful. He smiled gently. Always. As he stepped back outside, he glanced once more at the crack near the ceiling. The open house wouldn't just be a showcase, it would be a stress test. And before what happens next, when polished glass meets shifting ground, subscribe with the bell on, because this isn't just about buildings. It's about what holds when pressure hits. He mounted his bike and rode back toward the development, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the perimeter wall. Inside the gated entrance, the air felt heavier. Staff moved briskly now, finalizing centerpieces, adjusting lighting, testing sound systems. A subtle energy hummed beneath it all, anticipation layered over ignorance. Caleb headed straight for the basement control room Arya had unlocked digitally moments earlier. The sensor interface glowed faintly on the monitor. Live feed. Baseline readings scrolled across the screen. He watched for several seconds. Then, a spike. Small, but sharper than yesterday. He swallowed slowly and began mapping the oscillation pattern in real time, fingers moving with practiced precision across the keyboard. Above him, champagne glasses clinked as a rehearsal toast echoed through the atrium. Below, numbers climbed, and the ground beneath both worlds kept shifting. Caleb didn't blink as the numbers scrolled across the monitor. The baseline tremor he'd mapped earlier had shifted upward by nearly 12% in the last hour. Not catastrophic yet, but trending wrong. He adjusted the sensor filters, isolating the North Wing's subfloor network. The waveform sharpened instantly. Directional stress. He exhaled slowly through his nose. Footsteps pounded down the basement corridor. Victor appeared in the doorway, face tight. Why are you in the control room? Authorized access. Caleb replied without looking up. Victor's eyes flicked to the screen. What am I looking at? Live vibration feed. It's within tolerance. For now. Victor stepped closer. You're creating panic where none exists. I haven't told anyone. Your presence down here says enough. Another spike flashed across the screen, stronger this time. Even Victor saw it. That's equipment calibration drift, Victor said quickly. No, Caleb replied calmly, it's harmonic amplification. You've got concentrated load above unstable soil. Victor scoffed, but his voice carried less conviction. You're a maintenance tech. Caleb finally turned to face him. I used to design structural reinforcements for mixed soil developments. The words hung in the cold air. Victor blinked. That's not funny. I'm not joking. For a moment, uncertainty cracked Victor's composure. Then it sealed shut again. If that were true, you wouldn't be down here cleaning vents. Life changes, Caleb said evenly. Victor's jaw flexed. The open house proceeds. Another tremor rippled through the pipes overhead. Dust shook loose in a faint sprinkle. Victor felt that one. He straightened stiffly. Miss Vale doesn't want disruption. She wants stability. She wants investors confident. Confidence built on compromised reinforcement won't last. Victor stepped closer, lowering his voice. If you sabotage this launch, I'll see you terminated. Caleb didn't flinch. If I stay silent and someone gets hurt, I'll see myself responsible. Their eyes locked for a long second. Then Victor's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, Arya's name. He stepped into the hallway to answer. Caleb returned to the monitor, isolating the north balcony load zone. He overlaid projected crowd weight from event estimates. Even a conservative calculation pushed the stress threshold dangerously close to tipping. He saved the projections and transmitted them directly to Arya's encrypted email. Moments later, his own phone buzzed. "Explain the red line," Arya said immediately. "It's the failure point," he answered. "And we're how close?" "Closer than you'd like. Silence." He imagined her upstairs, staring at the same data now on her tablet. "If we redistribute foot traffic?" she asked. "It helps. But it doesn't solve soil saturation beneath the outer pilings. We can't pour reinforcement tonight." "No." Her breathing slowed slightly as she processed options. "What's your mitigation plan?" He appreciated that she asked it that way. "Temporary load restriction in the north wing. Keep attendees moving. No static clustering. That's not how showcase events work. It is if you want the floor intact." Another tremor registered, this one slightly stronger than the last. Even the monitor's frame vibrated faintly. She heard it through the line. "All right," she said quietly. "You'll coordinate movement under the guise of facility oversight." "Understood." "And Caleb." He paused. "If this escalates tomorrow, you step forward, I will." The call ended. Victor returned moments later, tension evident in the tight set of his shoulders. "Miss Vale says you're assisting with crowd flow logistics." "Yes." He forced a thin smile. "Congratulations. Try not to overestimate your importance." Caleb didn't answer. Instead, he saved the latest vibration logs onto a secure drive. Evidence mattered. If the ground gave way, data would speak louder than pride. Above them, rehearsal laughter echoed faintly. He closed the interface and headed upstairs, emerging into the glow of chandeliers and polished marble. Workers adjusted banners. Staff practiced welcoming smiles. The north balcony loomed overhead, elegant, inviting, heavy. He walked beneath it and paused, listening. The building had a language most people never learned. He had. A subtle creak threaded through the steel frame, almost melodic beneath the violin's distant tuning. He placed his palm flat against the support column again. The tremor responded like a heartbeat out of rhythm. Behind him, Arya approached quietly. "You were right about the directional stress," she said, voice low enough to stay between them. "It's accelerating." She looked up at the balcony where tomorrow's guests would gather with champagne glasses in hand. "We can't evacuate preemptively," she murmured. "It would be speculation. Then we don't speculate," he said. "We prepare." Her eyes moved to his face, not dismissive now, not skeptical. "Evaluating." "You're remarkably calm," she said. "I've handled worse." A beat. "In a previous life?" she asked carefully. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he looked back up at the structure and said, "Tomorrow isn't about impressing investors. It's about keeping everyone standing." The tremor pulsed again, longer this time. And upstairs, crystal glasses chimed softly, unaware. The open house began the next afternoon beneath a sky so clear it almost felt staged. Sunlight poured through the towering glass fade, refracting off polished marble and gold-trimmed railings. A string quartet played near the atrium fountain, their notes light and effortless. Caleb stood just beyond the north wing staircase, a tablet in his hand displaying the live vibration feed Arya had authorized. To everyone else, he looked like maintenance staff overseeing climate controls. To him, the numbers felt louder than the music. Guests filtered in, investors in tailored suits, local officials, media representatives. Laughter rose in measured bursts. Champagne corks popped. Shoes tapped against marble in clusters. Each cluster mattered. He watched the waveform rise incrementally as people lingered near the balcony railing to admire the skyline view. Static load. Sustained pressure. Arya moved through the crowd with practiced composure, greeting guests, shaking hands, projecting confidence. But her gaze flickered toward him more often than anyone else would notice. A spike. Small but sharper than baseline. He stepped closer to the staircase and addressed a group of guests politely. "We're encouraging continuous flow toward the East Lounge for optimal viewing," he said evenly. "Best light angle from there." The phrasing was deliberate, non-alarming, operational. Most complied without question. Victor approached moments later, smile fixed but eyes sharp. "Why are you redirecting foot traffic?" "Load distribution," Caleb replied quietly. Victor's jaw tightened. "You're making this look disorganized. I'm keeping it stable." Another tremor passed, subtle, but this time several guests paused mid-conversation. "Did you feel that?" one woman asked. Victor laughed lightly. Building settling, perfectly normal. Caleb's tablet flashed another minor spike. He glanced up toward the north balcony. More guests had gathered there than he'd anticipated. Arya noticed too. She excused herself from a conversation and moved toward him, lowering her voice. "It's climbing, yes. How close?" "Closer." The quartet transitioned into a brighter piece, attempting to smooth the atmosphere. But beneath the music, a low groan threaded through the steel frame, barely audible but present. Caleb felt it through his boots. His mind moved rapidly now, calculating, adjusting projections in real time. The reinforced pilings were absorbing strain unevenly. If the outer soil pocket shifted even 2 centimeters, another spike. Larger. The tablet vibrated in his hand. Upstairs, a glass shattered. Not from dropping, just a hairline fracture giving way under vibration. Conversation stilled. Victor stepped forward quickly. "Please remain calm." Minor acoustic resonance. The floor beneath the north balcony gave a faint but unmistakable lurch. A ripple moved through the crowd like wind through tall grass. Caleb didn't hesitate. "Everyone moved toward the atrium now," he called, not shouting, but projecting with controlled authority. No running. Steady pace. The tone in his voice cut through the confusion. Arya echoed him instantly. "Please follow facility guidance. This way." Their coordination wasn't rehearsed, but it was instinctive. Guests began moving. Some faster than advised. The vibration intensified as foot traffic surged. "That's worse," Victor hissed. "Yes," Caleb replied, eyes locked on the load graph. The outer balcony beam emitted a sharper creak, longer this time. He moved quickly to the support column and dropped to one knee, pressing his palm against the seam. The tremor wasn't random anymore. It was building. "Victor," he said evenly, not looking up, "clear the balcony. Now." Victor hesitated half a second too long. A second lurch hit, stronger. Screams pierced the music. Arya stepped directly into the staircase path, everyone down. Now, her authority carried weight. Guests poured off the balcony in a controlled rush, heels striking steps, hands gripping rails. The waveform on Caleb's tablet peaked sharply, then plateaued as weight shifted. He exhaled slowly, but didn't stand. The stress wasn't gone. It was redistributing. He looked toward the eastern support line. Hairline cracks spidered faintly along the paint near the ceiling. Arya saw them too. "That wasn't supposed to happen," she murmured. "No," he agreed. The room had grown eerily quiet now. The quartet had stopped playing entirely. Victor's composure finally cracked. "This is a disaster. It's contained," Caleb replied calmly. For now, another tremor pulsed, less violent but sustained. He stood slowly and turned toward Arya. "We need to restrict occupancy immediately. Full evacuation of the north wing." "In front of media?" Victor protested. "In front of gravity," Caleb answered. Arya didn't hesitate this time. "Clear it." Staff moved swiftly now, ushering guests toward the atrium and exit corridors. Murmurs swelled, cameras lowered. Conversations shifted from admiration to alarm. Caleb's tablet displayed declining load values as bodies left the stress zone. He watched until the waveform stabilized near baseline. Only then did he allow himself to breathe fully. Victor stared at the cracks near the ceiling, face pale. "How did you know?" Caleb didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked around the room, the shaken investors, the silent musicians, the faint dust settling through shafts of sunlight. Then he said quietly, "Because foundations speak before they fail." And this time, everyone had heard it. Dust drifted lazily through the atrium light, settling over polished marble like a quiet accusation. The north wing stood half-emptied now, velvet ropes hastily repositioned, staff murmuring into headsets with tight controlled urgency. Caleb remained near the support column, eyes fixed on the live vibration feed. The baseline was lower, but not safe. Arya approached him without her usual entourage. No champagne glass, no rehearsed smile, just focus. "How stable?" she asked. "Temporarily," he said. "We reduced static load, but the soil pocket's already compromised." Victor paced nearby, phone pressed to his ear. "No, this isn't structural failure," he insisted to someone on the line. "It's a precautionary redirection." Precautionary. Caleb almost smiled at that. Arya followed his gaze to the cracks faintly webbing the upper corner near the balcony beam. "If we evacuate entirely, it triggers regulatory inspection. If you don't," he said evenly, "it triggers physics." Her jaw flexed. The remaining guests gathered in uneasy clusters near the atrium fountain, whispering. Media cameras were no longer pointed at skyline views. They were angled toward the tension unfolding in real time. This was the edge. Caleb stepped closer to Arya and lowered his voice. "You need visual confirmation, not just sensor data." She studied him. "What are you proposing?" "Access to the outer foundation seam, north perimeter. We verify displacement directly. That area's sealed." "Then unseal it." Victor ended his call and strode over. "Absolutely not. You start peeling back structural panels during an investor event and you create panic headlines." "Headlines are already forming," Arya said quietly. Victor stared at her. "We can manage optics." Caleb's eyes never left the tablet. Another subtle oscillation flickered across the screen, smaller than before, but sustained. "It's not optics," he said. "It's sheer stress." The word landed harder than anything else had today. Arya made a decision. "Clear the remainder of the building," she said to Victor. His eyes widened. "You can't be serious. I am." Guests were guided out with practiced calm. The quartet packed their instruments in silence. Staff moved briskly but carefully, avoiding sudden movements that might amplify vibration. Within minutes, the atrium stood nearly empty. The silence felt heavier than the music had. Arya turned back to Caleb. "Show me." He nodded once. They moved through the service corridor toward the north perimeter access hatch. The air smelled of dust and cooling metal. Pipes overhead ticked faintly as the building adjusted to redistributed load. He knelt at the sealed panel and removed the maintenance screws with steady hands. Arya crouched beside him despite the dirt. The panel came free. Behind it, the outer concrete seam was visible, raw, unpolished, honest. A visible separation line ran diagonally across the joint. Arya inhaled sharply. "That wasn't there last month," he said quietly. Victor stepped closer, color draining from his face. "It's superficial." Caleb shook his head slightly. "It's migration." Another faint tremor rippled through the exposed seam. Even Victor saw it. Arya reached out instinctively, fingers brushing the cold concrete as if touching the truth would make it less severe. "How much time?" she asked. Impossible to guarantee, he answered, but the longer static load sits above it, the worse it gets. She rose slowly, dust clinging to the hem of her slacks. Victor ran a hand through his hair. If this becomes public, it already is, she said, glancing toward the glass atrium where a few media figures still lingered outside the perimeter line. Caleb stood and wiped his hands on a cloth. This isn't about blame, he said. It's about correction. Victor looked at him sharply. Correction costs millions. Collapse costs more. Silence followed. Arya studied the exposed seam one last time, then turned toward the atrium doors. Her posture shifted, not defensive now, but resolute. We're announcing a temporary closure for structural reassessment, she said. Victor blinked. You're admitting fault. I'm prioritizing safety. Caleb felt something subtle shift in the room, not just the foundation, but the hierarchy. The invisible maintenance worker was no longer invisible. Arya stepped into the atrium, where cameras waited uncertainly beyond the glass. She spoke calmly, deliberately, explaining precautionary measures and the importance of structural integrity over optics. Caleb remained near the column, monitoring the sensor feed. Numbers stabilized further as occupancy dropped to near zero. For the first time since yesterday, the waveform flattened. Arya returned moments later, tension still present but steadier. It's done, she said. Victor exhaled sharply. Investors will demand accountability. They'll receive it, she replied. Caleb closed the tablet and looked up at the balcony above, the place where champagne had nearly met collapse. It held, she said quietly. For now, he answered. She met his eyes. Thank you, she said, not procedural this time, not distant. Before this story moves into what comes next, the investigation, the reckoning, and the moment power changes hands, subscribe with the bell on, because what happens after exposure is where real transformation begins. The building stood silent around them. But the foundation had finally been heard. The atrium lights dimmed as the last of the media crews packed away their equipment. Outside the glass fade, dusk settled slowly over the skyline, painting the horizon in muted gold. Inside, the once celebratory space felt hollow, like a stage after the applause fades. Caleb remained beneath the north balcony, tablet still in hand, watching the vibration feed level into a steady, fragile calm. Arya stood a few steps away, phone pressed to her ear. Yes, I understand the financial implications, she said evenly, but structural reassessment isn't optional. A pause. No, we're not framing this as damage control, we're framing it as responsibility. Her tone had shifted. It wasn't defensive. It was firm. Victor paced near the fountain, muttering under his breath as he reviewed emails flooding in from investors. His confidence had thinned noticeably. Caleb finally powered down the tablet. It's stabilizing, he said. For now, Arya replied, echoing him. The words lingered between them. Emergency inspection teams were scheduled to arrive within hours. The building would undergo full structural review before reopening. That decision alone had sent shockwaves through corporate channels. Victor stopped pacing. You realize this puts us under regulatory microscope. Arya didn't look at him. Good, he blinked. Good. If reinforcement was reduced improperly, I want it documented. Victor's jaw tightened. It was within allowable revision. It was inadequate, she said sharply. Silence fell again. Caleb stepped toward the support column one last time and pressed his palm lightly against the surface. No tremor, he exhaled slowly. Arya watched him. You were certain. I was cautious, he corrected. She studied his face carefully now, as if recalibrating how she saw him. You don't speak like maintenance. I don't speak like investors either. A faint breath of almost laughter escaped her. Not amusement, recognition. Victor's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen and hesitated. They're asking who identified the risk. Arya's gaze flicked toward Caleb. He shook his head slightly. She understood. The issue was detected internally. She replied into Victor's phone before he could speak. We're reviewing procedures. Victor ended the call, unsettled. You're protecting him. I'm protecting the company, she said evenly. And the truth, outside, headlights swept across the gated entrance as black SUVs began arriving. Regulatory officials, insurance analysts, structural engineers. Real experts. Caleb felt the weight of that thought settle. Arya stepped closer to him, lowering her voice. When they ask technical questions, I'll answer, you don't have to, I want to. She held his gaze for a long moment. Why? She asked quietly. He glanced toward the exit doors, toward the direction of his neighborhood beyond the perimeter wall. Because it doesn't stop here, he said. The soil shift extends outward. Her eyes sharpened. To the surrounding properties, yes, a flicker of concern crossed her face, not corporate, but personal. She thought of the modest houses lining the outer edge of her development. Of his house. Your home, she said softly. He nodded once. Victor overheard enough to stiffen. We're not liable for external settlement beyond construction boundaries. Caleb's voice remained level. Gravity doesn't recognize property lines. The truth of that statement hung heavy. Emergency vehicles rolled into the lot now, tires crunching over decorative gravel. Uniformed inspectors stepped out, clipboards in hand, scanning the structure with professional detachment. Arya straightened instinctively, slipping back into executive posture, but something had shifted. She no longer stood alone in authority. She gestured toward Caleb. He'll brief you on initial vibration patterns, she told the lead inspector. Victor's head snapped toward her. He's not. He is, she said firmly. The inspector approached, offering a brief nod. You identified the anomaly? Caleb met his eyes calmly. Yes. Based on what metrics? He unlocked the tablet and reopened the archived data logs, walking the inspector through directional stress accumulation, soil saturation variables, reinforcement depth reduction, and load redistribution during the event. The inspector's expression changed gradually, from polite skepticism to focused interest. These are precise projections, the inspector said. They're conservative, Caleb replied. Arya watched silently as professional respect replaced social dismissal in real time. Victor shifted uncomfortably. When the briefing concluded, the inspector turned to Arya. You were fortunate someone noticed early. Arya's gaze didn't leave Caleb. We were. The inspector nodded and moved toward the north perimeter access point. The atrium stood nearly empty now, echoing with the distant sounds of measuring tools and technical discussion. Caleb lowered the tablet slowly. Arya stepped beside him. You didn't have to expose this, she said quietly. It would have been easier to stay silent. He thought of Lila's coughing the night before, of the crack in his ceiling. Easy doesn't hold weight, he said. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Beyond the glass, flashing lights reflected against marble floors, red and blue against gold. The building would be scrutinized. Reports would be filed. Costs calculated. But something irreversible had already happened. The maintenance worker who returned a wallet had just become the reason a luxury development still stood, and the foundation of more than one reputation had shifted. The inspectors worked quickly, boots echoing through the service corridor as they set up portable scanners along the north perimeter seam. Laser levels cast thin red lines across concrete. Measuring tools hummed softly, translating stress into data. Caleb stood beside the lead inspector, answering questions with quiet precision. Reinforcement depth reduction. Soil saturation patterns. harmonic amplification under concentrated load. He spoke without embellishment, hand steady, tone even. Victor lingered several steps back, arms folded tightly across his chest. One of the junior engineers crouched near the exposed seam and ran a digital gauge along the crack line. The device beeped once, then twice. "Displacement confirmed," the engineer said. "How much?" the inspector asked. 2.4 centimeters outward migration. Arya's breath caught faintly. "That's beyond tolerance," the inspector said flatly. Victor's composure faltered. "That's temporary settling." The inspector didn't look at him. "No, that's progressive shift." Caleb felt no satisfaction in being right, only urgency. "Check the outer pilings," he said. "Specifically the northeast cluster." The inspector glanced at him, then nodded to his team. "Do it." They moved swiftly. Minutes passed like stretched wire. Arya stood near the atrium entrance, hands clasped loosely in front of her, watching professionals dismantle the illusion of invulnerability piece by piece. A technician emerged from the perimeter access point. Pilings reduced by 17% from original blueprint. Victor went pale. "That revision was approved," he insisted. "Approved doesn't override physics," the inspector replied coolly. The words echoed something Caleb had said earlier. Arya turned slowly toward Victor. "Why was the depth reduced?" "To meet deadline compression," Victor answered, voice thinning. Reinforcement margin was still compliant. "Compliant," she repeated quietly. The inspector rose from his crouch and faced Arya directly. If the event had continued at full occupancy for another 30 minutes, that balcony could have experienced partial shear failure. Silence flooded the atrium. 30 minutes. Caleb pictured champagne glasses tipping, marble cracking, panic turning into something irreversible. Arya's eyes flickered toward him, not with surprise anymore, but recognition. Victor swallowed hard. "We can reinforce immediately." "Yes," the inspector agreed, "but this wing remains closed until full remediation." Reporters outside the glass doors caught sight of officials moving equipment and began raising cameras again. Arya inhaled slowly. "This goes public," she said. "It already has," the inspector replied. Caleb stepped back, allowing the professionals to reclaim the technical stage. He didn't need to dominate the moment. The data spoke clearly. But the inspector wasn't finished. "You," he said, turning back toward Caleb, "what's your background?" A pause. "Structural engineering," Caleb answered. Victor's head snapped toward him. "That's not documented in. It doesn't have to be documented in payroll," the inspector said sharply. "Your analysis likely prevented a significant structural event." Arya stepped closer. "He's the one who insisted we restrict load during the open house." The inspector studied Caleb for a long second. "You're certain the outer soil pocket affects adjacent properties?" "Yes." "How far?" "Within a 2-block radius depending on saturation." Arya's face tightened again. The inspector nodded slowly. "We'll extend the survey perimeter." Victor looked stunned. "Extend? That implicates surrounding residential, which is exactly why we verify." The inspector cut in. Outside, the media presence intensified. Microphones angled toward the entrance. Arya squared her shoulders and walked toward the glass doors. Caleb watched as she addressed the press again, this time not as a developer defending optics, but as an executive acknowledging oversight. "We identified structural instability prior to any injury," she said clearly. "We are cooperating fully with inspectors and extending safety assessments to neighboring properties." Reporters shouted questions. Was this negligence? Who identified the issue? She didn't hesitate. An internal team member raised the concern. We acted immediately. Inside, Victor turned toward Caleb, anger simmering beneath embarrassment. "You've cost us millions." Caleb met his gaze evenly. "I prevented worse." Victor opened his mouth, then closed it. There was no argument left. The inspector returned with a tablet displaying updated perimeter scans. Soil displacement confirmed outward, he said. Minor cracking reported in one adjacent property. Caleb's pulse thudded once. Address? Arya asked. The inspector read it aloud. Caleb's house. The room tilted, not physically but emotionally. Arya's eyes found his immediately. Is your daughter there? She asked quietly. She's at home, he said. I'll have a team assess it immediately. He shook his head. I will. The inspector nodded. We'll accompany you. Arya stepped closer. I'm coming. Victor began to protest, then stopped. There was nothing left to defend. As they moved toward the exit together, inspectors, executive, maintenance worker, the power dynamic in the room had shifted permanently. Outside, camera flashes caught the unlikely procession. The man once questioned over a returned wallet now walked beside the developer as the expert who had kept her project standing. And as they reached the gated exit toward the modest street beyond, Caleb felt the tremor again. Faint but present beneath asphalt. This wasn't finished. Not yet. The convoy of inspection vehicles rolled past the manicured hedges and security gate, turning onto the quieter street where modest houses lined the curb. Flashing amber lights reflected off mailboxes and aging siding, a stark contrast to the polished marble they had just left behind. Caleb walked ahead of the group once they parked, boots striking familiar pavement. He didn't need the address repeated. He knew every crack in this sidewalk. Arya kept pace beside him, heels clicking less confidently now against uneven concrete. The inspectors followed with scanning equipment and handheld gauges. His porch light was still on. He took the steps two at a time and opened the front door. Lila? He called, trying to keep his voice steady. I'm here, she answered from the living room. She stood when she saw the strangers behind him, confusion flickering across her face. What's going on? Just checking the house, he said gently. Routine. The lead inspector stepped inside, scanning the ceiling line immediately. It didn't take long. There, the inspector murmured, pointing toward the upper drywall seam. The hairline crack Caleb had noticed earlier had widened slightly, just enough to confirm migration. A measuring tool beeped. 2 millimeters of expansion, the inspector said. Consistent with outward soil shift. Arya absorbed that silently. Victor, who had reluctantly followed behind, ran a hand across his forehead. This extends liability beyond our development. It extends responsibility, Arya corrected. Caleb moved toward the staircase and pressed his palm against the wall, feeling for vibration. Subtle. Present. He knelt near the front step where inspectors now placed a portable sensor to measure ground movement directly. The device hummed softly, lights blinking as it calibrated. Leela watched all of it quietly, inhaler clutched in her hand. Are we in trouble? She asked softly. He turned toward her, forcing calm into his expression. No, we're making sure everything stays safe. Arya crouched slightly to meet Leela's eye level. Your dad noticed something important, she said gently. That's why we're here. Leela looked up at him with quiet pride. The inspector straightened, minor structural strain. No immediate collapse risk, but stabilization recommended. Caleb exhaled slowly. What's the remediation? Arya asked. Perimeter reinforcement and soil compaction correction. Likely requires excavation along both sides of the wall. Victor stiffened. That affects multiple properties. Yes, the inspector replied. And the sooner it's addressed, the less severe it becomes. Arya didn't hesitate. We'll cover it. Victor looked at her sharply. That's a massive expenditure, so is a lawsuit, she said evenly. And so is ignoring warning signs. Silence settled into the small living room. Caleb stood slowly, eyes lingering on the crack near the ceiling. It's manageable, he said. If acted on now, the inspector nodded. You called it early. Victor glanced at him, resentment fading into reluctant recognition. How long were you tracking it? Long enough, Caleb replied. The inspector gathered his tools. We'll file formal findings within the hour. As officials stepped outside to document exterior displacement, Arya remained in the living room. She looked around, the worn couch, the neatly stacked books, the faint hum of the nebulizer machine on standby. I bought this house the day after you returned my wallet, she said quietly. He didn't look surprised. I wasn't sure how to approach it, she continued. It was scheduled for auction. I didn't want you blindsided. You could have told me sooner, he said. I know. She reached into her bag and withdrew a folder, the same one she'd carried before. I intended to transfer ownership back after restructuring paperwork, she said. Today makes that timeline immediate. She extended the folder. He hesitated only a second before taking it. Inside was the deed transfer authorization, signed. Leela stepped closer. What is it? It means, Arya said softly, this house stays yours. The words felt heavier than the crack in the ceiling. Victor re-entered, expression subdued. Inspection perimeter confirms displacement radius within 2 blocks. Arya nodded once. Then remediation begins at sunrise. He didn't argue. Outside, neighbors had begun peeking through curtains drawn by the unusual activity. Whispers traveled quietly along the sidewalk. The inspector returned to the doorway. Structural intervention starts tomorrow. You acted in time, Caleb gave a small nod. As the officials dispersed, Arya lingered a moment longer. You stood your ground in that lobby, she said. I dismissed you. You didn't know me, he replied. I should have. A faint tremor rippled once more beneath the floor, so subtle it might have been imagined. But this time, it didn't carry fear. It carried correction in motion. Arya stepped toward the door. We'll fix what we overlooked. He walked her outside. Flashlights swept across the perimeter soil as crews marked excavation lines. For the first time since the wallet hit marble, the imbalance felt addressed, not erased but acknowledged. The foundation had cracked. But it hadn't fallen. And neither had he. Morning light spilled across the street as excavation crews arrived just after sunrise. The quiet hum of engines replaced the distant, threatening vibration that had haunted the ground for days. Yellow caution tape lined sections of curb while engineers marked correction points with fluorescent spray. Caleb stood on his porch beside Lila, watching as soil compaction equipment lowered carefully along the perimeter of his yard. The crack near the ceiling inside had been stabilized overnight with temporary bracing. Permanent reinforcement would follow. Across the narrow street, Arya stepped out of a black sedan, not in heels this time, but in flat boots better suited for uneven ground. She walked toward him without an entourage, without cameras. Victor followed a few steps behind, subdued, clipboard tucked under his arm. His posture had changed, less defensive, more reflective. Full remediation plan is in motion, Arya said as she approached. North wing reinforcement, extended piling correction, perimeter soil stabilization for surrounding homes. Caleb nodded. That's the right move. She held his gaze for a moment. You forced that move. He shook his head slightly. The ground did. A faint smile touched her expression. Across the block, neighbors began stepping outside, drawn by the activity. Word had spread quickly overnight about the open house evacuation, about inspectors, about the maintenance worker who'd spotted what others missed. An elderly man from 2 houses down approached cautiously. You the one who raised the alarm? He asked Caleb. Caleb hesitated, then nodded once. The man extended his hand. Thank you. The simple gesture carried more weight than any investor's handshake ever could. Victor cleared his throat. Preliminary audit shows the reinforcement revision was executed under my directive to meet timeline compression. Arya looked at him steadily. I should have reevaluated the soil variance more thoroughly, Victor continued, voice tight but honest. That's on me, Caleb studied him quietly. It won't happen again, Victor added. Arya turned toward Caleb. Public acknowledgement is scheduled for this afternoon. Full transparency, he met her eyes. That's your call. No, she corrected gently. It's ours. The crews began drilling along the north perimeter line. The deep mechanical rumble now carried purpose, not threat. Leela tugged lightly at her father's sleeve. So we're staying? He crouched beside her. We're staying. Arya watched the exchange, then reached into her bag one final time. She withdrew a small metal key attached to a plain leather tag. I transferred the deed last night, she said quietly. No conditions. No leverage. He accepted the keys slowly. You didn't owe us that, he said. I owed you integrity, she replied. The words settled between them like something newly anchored. Later that afternoon, media gathered again. This time, not in a marble atrium, but along a modest residential sidewalk, framed by construction equipment and reinforced soil. Arya stood before the microphones, speaking plainly about oversight, correction, and accountability. She named Caleb, not as maintenance, but as the structural engineer whose vigilance prevented catastrophe. Cameras turned toward him. He didn't step forward for applause, he simply nodded once. Reporters asked about cost, liability, corporate responsibility. Arya answered each question directly. This isn't about loss, she said clearly. It's about preventing harm and listening when expertise doesn't wear a title. The phrase echoed down the block. Behind them, the stabilization equipment drilled deeper, anchoring steel into soil with steady rhythm. Caleb felt the vibration again, but this time it moved downward, reinforcing rather than destabilizing. As the press dispersed, neighbors approached with quiet gratitude. Conversations replaced whispers. Respect replaced assumption. Arya lingered beside him one last time before returning to her car. You stood where power never looks, she said softly, and you held. He glanced toward the reinforced perimeter, then toward his daughter laughing with a neighbor's child. Foundations matter, he replied. She nodded once and stepped away. The sun dipped slowly toward the horizon, casting long shadows across freshly compacted soil. The crack inside his ceiling would be repaired. The north wing would reopen only after full reinforcement. Policies would change. Inspections would tighten. But the real shift wasn't in concrete. It was in perspective. The man who returned a lost wallet had restored more than property. He had restored balance. And if this story moved you, if you believe dignity shouldn't depend on titles, ask me for the next story title, and we'll take on another injustice together. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. The single dad's daughter sent one email to the CEO. What she wrote made her cry. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next? You have 10 seconds to leave this floor before security drags you out. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. They ordered the maintenance worker off the executive floor. Told him he had 10 seconds before security removed him in front of investors and board members. He didn't argue. He smiled and made one call. What happened next would freeze the entire skyscraper, because power doesn't always sit in the corner office. Beneath the polished marble and tailored suits, something far more fragile was cracking. Rowena Virali didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The silence behind her carried more weight than shouting ever could. Investors stood near the glass walls overlooking the skyline. Champagne paused halfway to their lips. Assistants pretended not to stare. Security shifted closer. The man in the Navy maintenance uniform didn't look rattled. Caleb Ward checked the time on his old wristwatch as if she'd merely reminded him of an appointment. His boots were still dusted with drywall powder from the service corridor. A tool bag rested at his feet. Nothing about him suggested he belonged anywhere near the executive boardroom, yet he didn't move. The air on the 42nd floor felt thinner than it had minutes ago. Rowena's gaze sharpened. "Did you not hear me?" He had heard her, every syllable. He'd also heard something else, the faint irregular pulse beneath the building's digital hum. It wasn't audible to anyone else, just a subtle lag in the display screen cycling through investor projections behind the glass. He tilted his head slightly, studying the reflection in the polished wall. Numbers flickered for half a second too long. Most people wouldn't notice that. Caleb did. Security stepped forward. The executive floor gleamed with controlled wealth, custom Italian marble, sculpted lighting, the scent of expensive citrus polish. Beyond the frosted glass, the boardroom tables stretched like a runway for power. And in that space meant for decision-makers, he stood where no one believed he belonged. 10 seconds. Rowena folded her arms, confident in the choreography of authority. This was her building, her event, her moment. The maintenance worker reached into his pocket. A few executives smirked, assuming defiance or desperation. Instead, he pulled out a phone with a cracked corner. He didn't raise his voice. Hold that thought. He dialed. Rowena's jaw tightened. Escort him out, but before security could touch him, one of the digital screens inside the boardroom blinked. Then another. A soft ripple of confusion moved through the investors as projected revenue charts stalled mid-transition. It was subtle, almost invisible. Caleb lowered the phone from his ear but didn't hang up. 3 seconds, Rowena warned. Across the glass wall, a financial dashboard glitched again, this time long enough for the chief legal officer, Marissa Holt, to frown. She stepped closer to the screen. "Is that a delay?" she murmured. No one answered her. Caleb's gaze never left the numbers. He'd seen that pattern before. 5 seconds. Rowena's composure didn't crack, but irritation sharpened her tone. "You're done here." He finally looked at her directly. Calm, steady, almost sympathetic. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "if I leave right now, you're about to lose more than this meeting." A few investors exchanged looks. The audacity of it. Rowena stepped closer, heels clicking against stone. "That's not your concern." The screens flickered again, this time longer. Behind the glass, an assistant rushed toward the central console. Another executive tapped at a tablet, confusion spreading like a shadow across his face. Caleb glanced at his phone. The call had connected. "Yeah," he said softly into it, eyes still on the glitching projections. "It's happening again. Same signature." Rowena heard only fragments, enough to irritate her further. "You think theatrics will save you?" He ended the call. The hum in the walls deepened, barely perceptible. A tremor beneath the surface of perfection. Marissa's voice cut through the quiet. "Rowena, our investor access portals just froze." A ripple of murmurs broke the room's polished stillness. Security hesitated. Caleb didn't smile this time. He simply watched the numbers stall completely. And for the first time since issuing the ultimatum, the CEO's confidence faltered, just slightly, as the 42nd floor began to realize something was wrong. The investor dashboards didn't just freeze, they rolled backward. Projected gains blinked out, replaced by error strings and cascading authentication failures. A sharp electronic tone pulsed from the main display, soft at first, then multiplying across screens like an echo in steel. Marissa stepped fully into the boardroom now, heels striking fast against marble. "We're locked out of the live investment portal," she said, no longer whispering. It's rejecting executive credentials. Rowena straightened. That's impossible. Another assistant spoke from the console. It's not just here. Remote shareholders are reporting session terminations. The room's temperature seemed to drop. Caleb shifted his weight, eyes scanning the reflection of scrolling code in the glass wall. He didn't look surprised. He looked certain. Security still stood beside him, unsure whether to grab him or wait. Rowena turned back toward him slowly. What did you do? He exhaled through his nose. I didn't do anything. That's the problem. The electronic hum thickened, punctuated now by the faint vibration of overworked servers somewhere below their feet. Marissa studied him carefully. You said again? What did you mean? He hesitated, then answered evenly. There's a breach pattern in your legacy architecture. It masks itself as latency before it spreads to authentication nodes. Several executives stared blankly. Rowena did not. Her irritation shifted into something sharper. Calculation. Your maintenance, she said. You wouldn't even have access to that level of infrastructure, I don't, he replied calmly. But I built the layer underneath it. The words landed heavier than they sounded. A silence pressed in. An investor near the glass muttered. Built? The screens flickered violently, this time replacing financial charts with a blinking warning about compromised encryption certificates. Somewhere in the building, an alarm chirped once, then died. Marissa's eyes widened. Rowena, if this propagates to client accounts— It won't, Caleb interrupted, voice steady but firmer now. Not yet. Rowena faced him fully. Explain. He glanced toward the boardroom table where champagne flutes stood untouched. Your current cybersecurity team patched surface vulnerabilities last quarter, but they never closed the original back door embedded in the authentication cascade. It's hidden in a cost-reduced update from 3 years ago. Her jaw tightened. We invested heavily in that system. I know, he said quietly. Another pulse rippled through the monitors. The service elevator behind them dinged, doors sliding open to reveal 2 frantic IT analysts rushing out with tablets in hand. One of them froze when he saw Caleb. Recognition flickered across his face. Sir, the analyst started, then caught himself, confused by the uniform. Rowena, the breach signature matches an archived protocol labeled CW17. Caleb didn't react outwardly, but Marissa did. CW? She repeated. The analyst nodded quickly. It's tagged as the original security framework revision. We thought it was decommissioned. It wasn't, Caleb said. Rowena's gaze sharpened like glass under pressure. CW stands for what? He met her eyes without hesitation. Caleb Ward. A low murmur spread across the executive floor. The IT analyst swallowed. He designed the first-generation encryption matrix before the public launch. Several heads turned sharply toward him now, not at the uniform, but at the man inside it. If you're still here watching this unfold, subscribe with the bell on, because stories like this prove the underestimated are often the architects behind the curtain. Rowena's expression hardened, but doubt crept beneath it. You left this company nearly a decade ago. My daughter got sick, he said simply. I stepped down. The words weren't defensive, just factual. Behind the glass, another alarm sounded, longer this time. Marissa stepped closer to him. Can you stop it? Caleb's eyes returned to the screens. Code scrolled faster now, probing deeper layers. Yes, but not from here. Rowena hesitated only a fraction of a second. That fraction was visible to everyone. Where? She demanded. The primary server vault, he replied, level B2. The physical node still houses the root partition. If we isolate it before the exploit replicates, we contain the damage. The IT analyst nodded rapidly. That's correct. Rowena looked from the analyst to Caleb, pride and urgency warring in her posture. Moments ago, she'd given him 10 seconds to leave. Now the building's stability balanced on whether he stayed. Another monitor went dark. Marissa's voice cut in quietly but firmly. "Rowena, investors are starting to notice." Through the glass wall, uneasy conversations were growing louder. Phones were being raised, questions forming, public, visible, uncontainable. Caleb picked up his tool bag, not as a laborer dismissed, but as a man walking toward something he understood better than anyone else in the room. Rowena stepped aside. Security didn't touch him, and as he moved toward the elevator, the hum of the skyscraper deepened, like a machine recognizing its original maker had just returned. The service doors slid open with a metallic sigh. He stepped inside, tool bag in hand, Marissa close behind him. After a half-second of hesitation that didn't go unnoticed, Rowena followed too. The doors sealed them off from the executive floor's polished panic. The elevator descended. Fluorescent light hummed overhead. The scent of marble polish gave way to metal and dust as the digital display ticked downward, 41, 38, 32. Rowena folded her arms. "If this is some elaborate performance, it isn't," he said evenly. She watched him instead of the numbers now. The maintenance uniform, the worn boots, the calm breathing. None of it fit the archived personnel file forming in her memory. "You designed the original encryption matrix," she said, more a statement than a question. He nodded once. "And you never disclosed this vulnerability?" "I did," he replied. "In the exit audit. It was flagged as a long-term risk if the root partition was ever outsourced." Marissa's brows knit together. "We outsourced infrastructure optimization 3 years ago. The elevator dropped past level 12. Rowena's jaw tightened. That decision increased margins by 12%. It also created a bypass, he said quietly. "Whoever's exploiting this knows your internal architecture intimately. They're not attacking from outside. They're navigating through something familiar." A faint vibration traveled through the elevator cables, subtle but there. Marissa looked at the ceiling as if she could see through steel and concrete. "Is the vault already compromised?" "Not yet," he answered. "They're mapping. Once they mirror the authentication cascade, it spreads." The elevator dinged at level B1 but didn't stop. It continued downward. Rowena studied him in the harsh light. "You expect me to believe you can outmaneuver a coordinated cyber attack because you wrote the first draft of our system?" "I don't expect you to believe anything," he said. "I expect you to decide whether you want this contained before your investors watch their portfolios evaporate in real time." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. Silence pressed into the tight space. The doors opened at level B2. Cool air rolled in, heavy with ozone and machine heat. The corridor beyond was narrower than the executive halls above, lined with exposed piping and reinforced concrete. Security panels blinked red along the walls. This was the labor zone. The place meant for technicians, not CEOs. Yet Rowena stepped out first. 2 engineers were already there, arguing over a tablet. They froze when they saw him emerge behind her. One whispered, "It's him." The other nodded once, stunned. Caleb moved past them without ceremony. His hand brushed the cold metal of the primary vault door, fingers lingering for half a breath as if reacquainting himself with something old. The panel beside the vault blinked an error code. He leaned closer. "That's new," he murmured. Rowena crossed her arms again, though the gesture lacked earlier certainty. "Explain." "They've inserted a recursive loop into the authentication handshake," he said. "It forces the system to validate itself indefinitely while copying credentials." Marissa looked at the engineers. "Can you shut it down?" One shook his head. "We can't access root-level commands. It's locked behind legacy clearance." All eyes turned toward him. The air inside the corridor felt charged, thick with heat from the server banks behind reinforced walls. A low mechanical roar vibrated underfoot, constant and alive. Rowena's voice dropped. "Do you still have clearance?" "No," he said. "But I have something better." He set his tool bag down and unzipped it. Inside were standard maintenance instruments, wrenches, insulated gloves, a small diagnostic tablet far older than the sleek devices the engineers carried. He pulled out the tablet. The engineers exchanged doubtful glances. "That device isn't even on our current network," one said. "It doesn't need to be," he replied. He connected a cable directly to a secondary maintenance port beneath the security panel, a port most executives probably didn't know existed. The small screen flickered to life, lines of code scrolling in stark white against black. Rowena stepped closer despite herself. "You kept access?" she asked. "I kept knowledge," he corrected. The engineers leaned in, watching as he navigated through command strings with muscle memory precision. He didn't rush, each keystroke deliberate. Marissa exhaled slowly. "If this fails, it won't," he said, though his voice carried the weight of risk. Above them, the building shuddered faintly. An alert echoed through the corridor, this one louder than before. One engineer glanced at his tablet. "They've started replicating user credentials." Rowena's composure cracked at last. "How long?" "Minutes," the engineer answered. Caleb's jaw tightened. Sweat beaded lightly at his temple, not from fear but from the heat radiating through reinforced steel. He adjusted the cable and typed another command. The old tablet paused. For half a second, nothing happened. Then the recursive loop on the main panel froze mid-sequence. The engineers stared. "It's stalled," one whispered. Rowena didn't smile. She didn't relax. But for the first time since the screens flickered upstairs, she looked at him not as an intruder, but as the only person in the room who understood the battlefield they were standing on. The stalled code on the vault panel flickered like a heartbeat caught between beats. For one suspended second, the recursive loop held in place, frozen mid-command. Then a new line of script attempted to overwrite it, faster, sharper, more aggressive. "They're adapting," one of the engineers breathed. Heat pressed harder against the corridor walls. The mechanical roar behind the reinforced door deepened, servers pushing against thermal limits as authentication requests multiplied above them. Caleb didn't look up. His fingers moved again, rerouting the stalled sequence into a containment buffer. "They didn't expect resistance at this layer," he said quietly. "This was supposed to be invisible." Rowena stood just behind his shoulder now, close enough to see the reflection of code in his eyes. "Can you block it completely?" "Not block," he replied. "Redirect." Marissa crossed her arms tightly. "Redirect to where?" "A sandbox partition," he answered. "A dead environment. Let it think it's expanding while it suffocates itself." The engineers exchanged a quick glance. One of them nodded slowly. "That partition hasn't been active since the initial architecture phase." "Exactly," he said. The old diagnostic tablet hummed in his hands, its battery indicator already dropping under the strain. He adjusted a setting, bypassing a layer that hadn't been documented in any modern manual. Rowena caught it. "That path isn't listed in current system maps." "It wouldn't be," he replied. "I buried it." Her gaze sharpened. "Why?" "In case someone powerful decided short-term optics mattered more than long-term security," the words weren't accusatory. They didn't need to be. A tremor ran through the floor, subtle, but unmistakable. One engineer checked his tablet again. "Credential replication is accelerating. It's copying executive-level access." Maurice's voice dropped lower. "If that reaches investor accounts—" "It won't," he said again, though this time there was strain beneath the steadiness. The main panel flashed red, then white. Above them, faint through layers of steel and concrete, a chorus of notifications began echoing from upper floors. Phones buzzing, alerts firing. Investors noticing something wasn't right. Public. Visible. The very thing Rowena had feared most. She stepped back half a pace, absorbing the implications. If this leaks outside this building, it already has, Marissa said quietly. Social feeds are asking why our stock preview stream paused. The CEO inhaled slowly, fighting the instinct to regain control through force of will. Authority didn't function against invisible code. Caleb adjusted the cable connection. Sweat rolled down his temple, disappearing into his collar. His breathing remained measured. The sandbox partition blinked into partial existence on the tablet's screen. Almost, he murmured. The engineers leaned closer. The attack script hesitated again, confused by the rerouting. For a moment, it appeared to retreat. Then a new burst of commands slammed into the authentication cascade. They've escalated. One engineer whispered. This isn't random. Someone knows the original framework. Caleb's jaw tightened. He knew that too. Only a handful of people had ever seen the blueprint of that system in its infancy. Only a few understood how its foundation intertwined with corporate identity layers. He typed a final string of commands and pressed enter. Nothing happened. The corridor seemed to hold its breath. Then the recursive loop shattered into fragmented code, redirected into the dormant sandbox partition. On the main panel, the red warning softened to amber. The engineers stared in disbelief. It's isolated, one said, voice unsteady, replications contained. Above them, the faint chorus of notifications diminished. Rowena closed her eyes briefly, absorbing the reprieve. But Caleb didn't relax. They're still inside, he said. Marissa blinked. What? The breach isn't just the loop. That was the distraction. He straightened slowly, eyes scanning fresh lines of data forming beneath the surface. This was reconnaissance. The engineer's relief faded instantly. Rowena stepped closer again. Meaning whoever launched this knows the system intimately enough to test its boundaries without collapsing it. His voice